Well, it's wonderful to be here with you today. Ollie, look, you're a man of many talents with many hats, whether it's an executive coach, a speaker, adventurer, elite athlete, business owner, and many, many other things. And one thing you absolutely know something about is building really, really high-performing teams, and that's exactly what we're going to focus on today. You're leading a business called Optimist Performance, which promises to move people not from good to great, but from great to world class. And I love that framing. I love that ambition. And you in your work, I know you and I go back a while, you focus on the hard bits of leadership and hard bits of team around trust, energy, the relationships, having the right mindsets, as well as all the other stuff. And we're going to dig into all of that in this conversation. But before we do, welcome to the show.
Thanks, David. Thanks for having me, mate. It's great to be here. A pleasure to sort of, see a smiley face once more. Mr. Milk Tray, as always, and that delightful black polo neck. I love it. But
I knew you were
it's
going
good
to
to be
start in
here.
that way. All right. I will get you back for that one with a question later on. All right. Very, very good. Before we get stuck into sort of teams in terms of how you design teams and how you get them really supercharging to world class, I want to touch a little bit on your own origins and your own series of reinventions. I guess, starting with the fact that, you've obviously moved from elite sport, elite rugby, to now leading a high performance consultancy and all the other things you do around it. There have been many transitions that you've made along the way, professional and personal and family. If you had to pick out just one of those transitions or one of those moments that's really shaping how you show up right now, what would it be and why?
I mean, it's a cracking question. I think the hardest transition, I would say, for me was the initial one, which would have been from being a professional athlete into where we both met each other ultimately, which was in the PwC PricewaterhouseCoopers environment. The reason for that is having come from an environment where ultimately we were in the top 1 percentile of the world in terms of our ability to do the technical elements of the job. I understood the game of rugby inside and out, and I was very, very capable and talented in my specific role. And then transitioning into a business like PwC, where ultimately I wasn't very talented or capable in the technical elements of the job. But I was still in a leadership or, had senior responsibility as a director in that business. And I found that very, very challenging for me, that transition to ultimately not being the expert in the room and really needing to feel like the expert in the room and getting comfortable. We used to talk about it with England, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And for me, that was getting comfortable at this constant feeling of discomfort around, I don't know what you're talking about ultimately, like that. They're having lots of conversations where it's like, that sounds good. Just keep on doing what you're doing. That was a real challenge for me, and if you like, really tested my trust bucket, because I had to be so dependent on other people and other person's capabilities. Whereas in the past, I don't get me wrong, I had that dependency on a rugby field, but I could solve the problem myself if I really, really needed to, because I had the technical capability, and I found that transition very, very difficult, but equally very rewarding once I'd sort of adapted. But it did take a long time. It did take a long years.
And as you made that transition over that period of years, what did you really have to hold on to in those moments of feeling uncomfortable with that uncertainty?
I think my focus, I think, was on, I really wanted to keep developing myself, like pushing my own boundaries, my own capabilities. And I think it was about accepting that, okay, I might not now be I was a point in my rugby career where I was voted as the best player in the world. So I might not now be the best player in the world in this environment, because there are other players that are way better than me in a PwC or corporate environment. But I am relishing the opportunity of improving, of getting better, of developing a new talent. And I think there are lots of sports people that when they transition out of sport, they still, if you like, they still retain that identity and that they cling to that previous experience because they were so good at it. because they were so talented at it, they were so credible at it. And even now, like 10 years on or 15 years on from that point of retirement, people still credentialize them. They still hold their opinion in high esteem about rugby or whatever the sporting thing is. And I really wanted to be more than that. I wanted that to be a fantastic part of my life. I didn't want that to be defining my entire life. And I think that was
That's very wise. That's very wise. I mean, every time I read about you, hear about you, you're doing some form of adventure, often for very laudable charitable causes. And I doff my cap to you. Whether it's, I have them listed here, playing a rugby game on Mount Everest, trekking 100 miles across the Arctic, sailing across the world, cycling the width of the United States, climbing Kilimanjaro. And at the time of this recording, you're preparing for rowing across the Atlantic 40 something days with a couple of hours sleep a night, something. I mean, unbelievable. What do those adventures in all of their different forms, what do they do for you? What do they give you?
It's a really great question. And I've been asked this a couple of times in the past few weeks. I think I love having focus. I love having the focus of an event or something happening. I feed off community. Like my greatest stories in life never start with, David, let me tell you this one time I was on my own. Like, it never starts with that. It starts with, David, do you remember this time when we were at PwC, we did this? Or do you remember when we were on your podcast? Like, there's always this shared experience, this moment in time of something, however big, however small. And I find that often, not always, but a lot of these sort of extreme adventures, they feed my soul. They give me focus on that side. But the things that you just mentioned around the fundraising, the sponsorship, if you like, the charitable element of it really builds and fosters this incredible sense of community. And I feed off that energy a lot. And to use the row as an example, 4 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, I organised, basically we invited teams of 6 to effectively sponsor or take an ergo, and they all would row a marathon between them, marathon distance between 6 people. We didn't quite know how it would go. We ended up having 250 people want to participate and take part. The whole community bought into it. We raised 15, I think, or £16,000 from doing it. And it built so much momentum that now we've had like 3 or 4 sponsors reach out to us and say, look, that was so good. That looks such a brilliant event. Would you like to do it again next year? But we'll try and make it 1,000, that attend. And that for me, obviously all the great things, you raise the money, you give the charitable causes, there, if you like, they're the outcome of the process, but the process is the fun bit. And I think so often, whether that's in expeditions, whether that's in sport, whether that's in business, we really don't take time to enjoy the process. It's cliche, but the journey, because that's all the magic. The outcome is, we will hopefully successfully row the Atlantic, and at the end of that, there will be a certificate, a video that says that you've rowed the Atlantic.
I get it.
But it won't mean anything, right? Someone else will do it next year, and but no one will have had the experience that we had. Someone have similar, or but it'll be nuanced to us, and I think that's what's special. And for me, the more people that share in that experience, the better, because I feed off that.
That's wonderful to hear. So if you think about teams, whether it's you and your colleague rowing, the two of you, or bigger teams, whether in sport or adventures or in business, and you just in a nutshell had to give a sense of describing that sense of community and team, what are they? Just pick out 2 or 3 features of the highest performing teams where you say, you know what, in every case it was brilliant because of, world class because of. What would you distill it down to?
I think these key buzzwords get banded around a lot, right? But I would say ultimately trust is one of the most imperative foundations that sits on that. And trust doesn't always mean that you have to be nice, right? That's not what I mean. Being trustworthy is giving the right information at the right time that delivers value. whatever that value is, and people ultimately believing and trusting in the information that you're giving them and your opinion. And I feel like the best, the highest performing teams I've ever worked or had the privilege of being a part of, there has been like that base level of like, if you ask me to do something or you tell me to do something one way or the other, like I trust that is for the good of the team. I trust that it is for my personal development and for the collective
Yes.
development of the team, and I don't question that. And I think if you deliver on that continually, has to be a repeated pattern of behavior. And it is a skill, like it is absolutely a skill that you have to practice on day in, day out. Because do you know what? It is really difficult to not compromise your values and your behaviors at times, because it's
Yes.
hard. It's hard, right? It's hard to consistently show up, to consistently live and breathe whatever it is that you stand for. And because sometimes you get headwinds, and I think that element of the trust bucket is a massively important one. And probably the second one you asked for, I would say, is around the clarity of like communication. Like, sounds so simple, and often this stuff is common sense, but it's just never common practice. And like the art of understanding not only how you like, communication is not just the information that I give out to you, David, verbatim. It's me understanding the audience, how they need to hear things, what will enable them to listen, how well am I listening, how well am I translating and coaching the message across, what is the relevance of the message that I'm doing, all of these things. How do you distill that to really ensure that you get the biggest impact from whatever it is that you are trying to disseminate, or the action that you're trying to achieve? And I feel that is again something that is wildly misunderstood. More often than not, we just
Yeah.
see the world from our lens, and so we just give the information as we want to give it, or we think it needs to be delivered, rather than really taking responsibility and the time to think about, okay, well, how does this need to be heard?
Yeah, it requires you getting away from your ego a bit and actually investing the time to think about again, what do they need to understand, learn, contribute, and act upon. I completely agree. And you're working with teams of different shapes and sizes all the time as a coach and various other roles. What are the biggest, if you like, red flags that you see? Not just the opposites of what you just described, but where you think you either, you walk into the room, your first day with a team, and something pops up and you go, oh, okay, that's a red flag, or a warning sign at least of something not right. What would you pick out would be on your top of the list?
God, such a great question. I mean, look, it's so easy. Well, it's not so easy. It's a lot easier for me to give it from a sporting perspective than probably a corporate perspective. I think in the sporting environment, it was quite easy to understand that, because you would get you would get a philosophy, if you like, or a perspective from somebody that you would either really resonate with, or you would, it would clash with you. And as you get older, obviously you start to understand the things that you appreciate and that you recognize and can relate to more than others. And I can remember I was very fortunate as a young 19-year-old in a professional sporting environment coming into Newcastle Falcons. We were gifted with and he's unfortunately died now, but a guy called Steve Black, who was possibly the most sort of inspirational and influential character on my personal development, and definitely the team development that I was working in. And he just taught me so much. He used to sit me in his garage all the time, and I would listen to like Jim Rohn, Anthony Robbins, all these sort of great orators and great, if you like, reflectors on behavior. There's a few things he used to say to me, but one, from a sporting environment, one of the things that I used to always look at was the environment that you create. And there's two statements I'll give you: that ultimately the outcome is the same, but the environment, the behavior, the lived experience is totally different. So there were environments that I would walk into in a sporting context, well, and a corporate context, where the whole focus was on never losing, never lose. So
Yes,
we
yes.
won't lose. Like today, we can't lose today. Um, and then there were other change rooms and other teams, other environments where like we just love winning. And the approach is so different. The outcome is identical. If you never lose and you always win, it's the same thing. But the experience is totally different. And you probably hear this a lot. And I think it's such a failing, if I'm honest, in the narrative of society. But the number of times of like defense wins you games, right?
Yes.
It doesn't win you games, right? It doesn't win you games. If you defend and it's 0-0 at the end of the game, you don't win the game, you draw, right? Attack wins you games. If you win 59-58, you win the game, right? Like, so attack is what wins you games. So this love and appreciation of like,
there are analogies. I mean, you focus on the sporting bit there, but there are many analogies to business of being in an environment where it's all about risk or control or hedging your bets too much. And frankly, you may make a turn in the margins in the short term, but frankly, how many people would turn up every day going, okay, I'm going to give them my absolute best? You're probably looking around, you think, I better not make a false move and so
correct.
on. But how do you then, as you're thinking about teams, and there's a lot of work on team development, and you work with teams day in, day out, I still think there's a lot of team development that frankly is either too defensive, too narrow, too restrictive in that way, or frankly just a bit old school. What is, as you work with teams, what is the approach to team development that you think is most broken, and what do you try and do in your business that's, if you like, fresh and new and, and frankly enjoyable?
This is a huge subject area, right? But I think if I try and break it down, there's probably the environment that organizations, teams live and breathe in. If you like, the timescales that it takes and requires for trust or human behavior to change it's obviously a much longer and more continual and extensive process than ultimately that, things like the market give you. You have to report your quarterly earnings, your year-end reports, like, and if you don't hit your numbers, your share price tanks, or your profit distributions go, or whatever it is, right? So as a result, there's a total malfunction and miswiring of like long-term growth, because everything is geared towards short-term success. So, if I put my pound in tomorrow, I don't want to know what you're going to give me in 5 years or 10 years time. I need to know what's going to return in the next quarter and by the end of the year, because I run a pension fund, I run this, I've got my own personal ISA, whatever it is. Like, it needs to grow now, right? Everything's now. So that's a different, that's a slightly more different conversation. So, so the first part of that is, the wiring is slightly wrong. The second part of it is that when it comes to teaming, more often than not, the way that we promote in organizations is we champion, more often than not, the most successful individual, and that success is normally dictated by finance, right? How much money is that person made? And as a result, we just keep elevating them. So a really easy example is, sales. Really easy, right? The top sales performer keeps going up, keeps going. Eventually they become chief exec, or they become some certain role. Now, the skill of selling and the skill of managing are two totally different things.
Yes.
And what you find is then these people that become incredibly talented and incredibly skilled, in order to sort of retain them, they need to be at a managerial or senior executive level because of the pay bracket that they ultimately command for being the best salesperson or the best revenue earner. But they then put them into roles of responsibility, and they say, look, actually don't sell as much now, but just teach these 30 people that sit in your team how to sell, right? Well, they're not teachers. Normally in sales environment, particularly in sales environments, they're normally the most egotistical, narcissistic, selfish people, right? Because they're single-minded and they chase after every pound or dollar they can. Now you're asking them to do a thing where they're just giving of their time, giving of their knowledge. Like, that's a totally different, skill set. So I think there's, how we promote and recognize and reward success, given the outcomes that we want, are not correlated, right? We want a really collaborative workforce, but actually we're promoting a load of people that have single-mindedly chased after and looked after themselves, which there's no criticism of that individual. That's their skill set, right? That's what they're really good at, right? To use a football analogy, you're not going to put Cristiano Ronaldo in goal, right? You want him up front because he scores you 900 goals across a career. But if you start saying, Cristiano, I need you to get back and defend or put the gloves on, why have you let 7 goals in at the end of the game? Well, it's pretty obvious why he's let 7 goals in, because he's not very good at that, right? He's really good at scoring goals. So that was the, if you like, the second part of the where I think some of the misalignment is happening. So you've got the way that the market's structured, the way that we promote and reward and recognize talent, and then the third one probably sits in actually how do we cross pollinate, and how do we share information across teams. And I think the best ones of those are where there is a bit of a sort of a selfless nature to how you distribute and disseminate information. And the challenge that we have around that is more often that most people's time scales are finite. You know, everyone's time scale is finite in the grand scheme of it overall. But like, it was actually a really pertinent conversation that Steve Black told me. On my first ever cap for Newcastle, he wrote above my peg. It's a bit of a mouthful, but he said, "Look, the opportunity of a lifetime only exists within the lifetime of the opportunity." So, you could be, a bit of carpe diem or whatever, but you could get injured tomorrow. So, and lots of us are always planning and worrying about what might happen. Like, what will happen tomorrow, or like, I need to save now because this and this can happen. Or I see loads of people who sit, they've probably got 10, 20 million quid or whatever. And I'm like, why don't you, you can see your kid wants to go pay for their kid to go to private school. And they're like, oh, no, I can't do that. Why can't you do that? Why can't you pay for it? Well, yeah, but what happens if I get ill tomorrow? What happens if I get diagnosed with this? I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, sure, if that's how we want to live, like live in fear of the unknown, then it's so debilitating. Like, we would never move. Like, well,
No, I agree.
And I find that happens a lot.
Let me just continue. Let me just continue that thing, which is, if I were to caricature your brilliant qualities and say, take this as a compliment, it's the clues in the title. There's an optimistic nature of you. There's a sort of big ambition. You care about the causes. You want to be in that sense of community, right? And that experience and the journey, and give the sort of energy you can in furthering those causes. How do you deal with either individuals or teams where, either you're a part of them or you're advising them, and it's the opposite is true. Either they are very defensive, or there's a toxicity, or there's just a closed mind approach where, you can see the opportunity yourself, but actually they're just head down, negative, insular, and so on. How do you deal with it, and how do you start opening it up, if you like?
It's so relevant, the conversation, because I've actually experienced this very, very recently. The answer, honestly, David, is it's probably the biggest thing that drains my energy and my soul. Like, I find that the hardest thing to manage and to compute, because if I can see the opportunity, how do we help support that individual to see it too? And equally, I don't understand why you would be almost cutting your nose off to spite your own face in this scenario. Like, all the momentum is positive. Why are we now worrying about all these things that could go wrong when actually we're doing really well? Of course, there are always things that we could do better. That, you have to have that sort of appetite and zest to improve. But let's not forget equally about where we are and where we've come from. And I feel like those are the most challenging environments or people for me to work in. The honest truth of how do I manage them? I try and be reasonable. I try and, present a different perspective. The honest truth is, sometimes if they don't want to listen, they don't want to listen, right? You can't, the classic adage of like, you can take a horse to water, but you can't necessarily make them drink, right? So, and I think sometimes there is that need for, like, kind of your walk away price. I learned this in rugby.
That's a great point.
I learned this thankfully earlier on, of like, I got a really good example. I lived in and played for a team. I lived in Paris and played for a team called Stade Francais, and I loved that place. I loved the city. I loved the club. I loved everything about the environment. I loved the supporters. If you like, it was me. I'd found like my home. And as a result of that, I fulfilled my potential in that environment. And the result of it was I was a top try scorer in France. I got voted as the best player in Europe, and I was the top try scorer in Europe that year as well. So like this huge coming forward of like, Ollie, you've really delivered on your potential in this environment. And what happens in that sometimes, and this happened to me as a 26-year-old, was you probably lose sight of the things that are really important, and your ego takes over. And so to be aware of your ego. And my ego in that environment was I believed I was worth a lot more money. And I probably was, right? I probably was in the environment, given the criteria of like, if you're the top try scorer, if you are the this, and this, what should you be paid?
Yes.
Fine. Right. So I believed I should be paid more. They came back to me and said, look, we really want you to stay, but we're just going to offer you the same money that you were on before. And I was, wow, nonsense. This is rubbish. Da, da, da. I should be getting this. I'm being offered this over here. I'm being offered that over there. And so, I decided to go and leave and go somewhere else. Right. And the outcome of that for me was, well, actually, like, why am I doing this? Like, because the environment I've gone to, if you like, the style of play, the city, the people, the fans, the club, like,
yes,
they're really nice, don't get me wrong, but they're not quite me. Like, I found if you want to call it, my happy place. So, well, why have I gone and disrupted this, all in the pursuit of whatever it was at the time, an extra 40 grand or something like that? Now, don't get me wrong, like, fine, the money is important and you've got to be paid what you're worth, but there comes a point where, like, there's always someone that's got a blacker cat, if that makes sense. Like, I've got a black cat. Well, mine's blacker than yours, right? There's always someone that will earn more money than you somewhere in the world, right? At any point in time. So if your barometer of success and your need metric is going to be centered around that, you're always going to be disappointed because you will always get trumped. You will always get.
So there is something about that of letting people. So as convincing and inspirational as you can be, in that case, perhaps the coach to you, or in cases of others, leaders of other teams. But actually, some people have a different mindset. They don't want to be part of the journey. They feel something, and you have to let them go and understand the parameters, which sounds like common sense, but that's really against a lot of conventional wisdom, which is you can inspire everyone, you can convince everyone, you make the case for change, you can involve them. It's like some people can't, and you have to let them go and let them go.
Yeah.
Well, I want to continue that theme of how you inspire people and playing to your own strengths. I mean, I know that a lot of your work with teams is very much driven on, the building that trust and in environments that create experiences. So, you talk whether it's rally driving, treasure hunts, fun things in places that they remember. Wonderful. How do you then translate that energy, that buzz, that togetherness, that community back then to the day-to-day? How do you actually help make sure it's not just a nice event, but something that really lasts and sustains into a higher performance, world-class performance?
Yeah. So what I learned within the sporting context and the corporate context was, in the sporting environment, we spent 95% of our time practicing for 5% of the delivery. So we would operate at a level of discomfort, if you like, that far outreached what we would actually experience live in a game. And if we could execute under that criteria of like extreme exhaustion, extreme fatigue, extreme pressure, extreme time constraint, etc., when it came to the game, when those moments might arrive, like extreme fatigue, they'll only be there for like 20 seconds or 15 seconds, as opposed to 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes that you've trained at. But if they did arrive, you were habitualized to it. Didn't necessarily mean that you would always get it right, but you were just much more comfortable with it, right? And you were therefore able to operate at that level because you were habitualized to it. Contrast that to what I experienced in PwC and the corporate environment when it came to things like leadership, teamship. 95% of the time was spent on just playing the game, and 5% is spent on actually developing and practicing and having the opportunity for intentional practice of those core skills. So it would only be when the proverbial hit the fan that you'd have to like, well, can you lead with empathy now? Or can you go and have a challenging conversation? Or can you go and build trust in that environment, right? But by this point, it was Armageddon. It was always, you'd only have to execute. And equally, these people that were being asked to do it were either maybe naturally more capable than others, not always, but they'd had no training, they'd had no time to practice it ever, and it was on a 50-50 as to whether they get it right. Like, it was totally left to a bit of chance. And so I basically wanted to create and have created a business where we basically put you into as many situations and scenarios to have the opportunity for intentional practice, right? And
that's such a great point.
And if we, the more, to your point that you said, the more fun, if you like, but I like to say the more memorable we make the moment, the more likely it is that you are going to retain the skill sets that you use to execute. So if I put you into an environment that is long standing in your memory of like, what an unbelievable day, and I absolutely love that. And I remember that when we were asked for this, my natural preference was to do this. And that wasn't that constructive, or that was really constructive, whatever it was. And you know what? If it wasn't really constructive, then these were the things that I sort of agreed that I try and practice and do a bit more of. And equally, if it was really constructive, this is where I really need to step to the fore and do more of this, like be confident in that ability to do that. And ultimately, the more exposure I can give you as an individual or as a team to these pressure points, financial, emotional, mental, time, physical pressure, and the more that you can be exposed to them, get used to being in them, understand your tells, your lead preferences, and then understand how beneficial they are or aren't to certain scenarios, the more likely it is that you can improve. And if you can improve, the chance maybe before you had a 10% chance of doing it right and succeeding, and now we've upped that to 20, 30, 40, 50. We're still making progress.
I love how intentional that is, because I was being simplistic in describing it as fun. What you're saying there is that this is about creating moments that are, whether they are intense, difficult, challenging, where you can practice important skills, create the muscle memory, if you like. And then, so when you have to apply them into the corporate setting, you're more practiced, you're more skillful, you can remember it and either use it or remember, if it's a failing, something to try something different. And gosh, if only people understood that design. That's so powerful. That's so powerful. I want to flip for a moment now, as I do in these conversations. As you're designing and leading these experiences in your Optimist business or on one of your adventures, how do you leave the teams around you, whether it's the people in the business side or your family, as you're doing it? How do you leave them in good shape? So in a way, as you're doing these adventures, everyone's being lifted, as it were, as opposed to what sometimes happens with leaders in difficult and challenging roles, is they pursue their adventure, whatever that adventure is, and then the rest of the people have to carry the can or sacrifice things. What do you do to increase the odds of others leading and living well while you're off doing whatever you're doing?
Yeah, I think more often than not, the solution to this is allowing, we mentioned it earlier, intentional practice. So allowing and affording people the opportunity to upskill themselves at that particular piece, right? And don't get me wrong, I want to make sure in any environment I'm in, if you like, I am the least intelligent person in the room, the least capable person in the room, so that as a result of that, if everyone around me is better than me, the likelihood is that I'm probably going to learn and progress, right? So that's, I try and put myself constantly into an environment where you've probably felt that way. Like a really good example, some people love it, some people loathe it, is when you're asked to stand up and sing a song. It's the classic, right? But when people stand up and sing karaoke, some people love it, other people are like, God, this is so uncomfortable. So uncomfortable. And if you could bottle that feeling, and then if I said to you, look, every time that you're in an environment, if you can feel this way, just in your own internal self, you know that you are on the edge of developing and learning something new, right? That's your way of sort of sense checking that for you, right? So that, and don't get me wrong, to live that way all the time is challenging. So you're not going to be able to do it all the time, but it gives you that sense of, do you know what? I understand this level of discomfort and I keep pushing myself. And if we, to answer your question, if we can create environments where we can allow people to understand and know what that feels like and get comfortable with that, their progression will be higher. It's a bit like going to the gym. You start with being, God, this is so heavy. This is so heavy. And there's 5 kilos on each end. And then after 4 or 5 weeks, you're like, God, this still feels so heavy. This still feels so heavy. But now there's 20 kilos on each end, right? Like
Yes.
it's the same sentiment. It's the same feeling, but your progression is massive. Right. So you're still staying at the same stasis, the same level of discomfort, the same level of emotion and feeling, but actually your progression is you can take on way more load. You're way more capable. And I think that's how we sort of try and articulate it all the time. So they might not necessarily see the progress because they still feel the same way until they probably sort of stop and go, blimey, there's 20 kilos on each end of that bar.
Yeah. Look what's happening.
Yeah, look at what's going on, right? And it's the same thing. Like, wow, I didn't like all these people they're doing stuff, and that's on my desk, and they've actually gone and solved that problem. They don't ring me anymore, and it's the same. It's the same thing. So it's not like it's like a.
It's being conscious. Throughout this conversation, you've talked a lot about consciousness, giving people the consciousness of either understanding a feeling or a reaction or a thought, and then actually realizing how it can be an important ingredient into their personal development, their growth, their overall impact.
David,
I'm going to try and do that with you now. With a bit.
Do you mind if I just dive in, just add a tiny bit on that to that as well? So,
please,
if you like, the one red flag I would put around that is that human beings are the biggest critics of themselves, right? So,
yes.
So the problem that you often the problem that you often have is they will use the weights on a bar analogy. They will progress from an empty bar to 20 kilos on the end of it, right? But they still feel like they're struggling through, right? So they won't recognize and acknowledge the progression and the success that they've done because there's now 20 kilos in there. They'll just look at the person next to them that's got 50 on each end and be like, I'm still miles away.
Yes.
I'm still miles away.
Absolutely right.
And the challenge we have, and one of the things we and I, but as an optimist business, we always try and champion is like, if you like, celebrate. I know it so sounds cliche, but celebrating the progress, celebrating the wins, because nobody sits. And particularly in Britain as well, culturally, nobody sits and revels in the success of the process. They always just look at, well, that's great, but now we've got to get here. Now we've got to get here. And the problem is, if you live like that the whole time, everyone just gets exhausted. Nothing is ever good enough.
And it's miserable as well. It's miserable. I mean, so over the course of the last year, as I mentioned in our pre-sort of conversation, lost a bit of weight, got a bit fitter. And actually on a good day, I actually recognize the journey and the progress and think, hey, reasonable job. But if I look at people like you, I think, God, I'm nowhere near as strong and buff and my guns are nowhere near. And you sort of think it's okay to look and admire people, but sometimes just come back to yourself and say, I'm doing all right. And actually, I'm making some progress. Because otherwise, as you say, it's like it's never enough. Yeah. Life becomes really hard. And it's like, okay, you go around with your head down, and life's too short for that, right? But before we become too philosophical, I do want to flip now to around where I might make you a little bit uncomfortable to play to your previous script. We're going to do a quick fire round. I'm going to give you the two answers, so you can't go off script. Well, you can, and you probably will, but I'm going to bring you back. So here are some questions, okay. Right? So, in the heat of the moment, what helps you the most? Using your instinct or stopping and pausing?
I would tend to go instinct. I should stop more.
Okay. And when you're thinking about building stronger teams, would you look for shared adversity or shared ambition?
Shared ambition.
And if you had to give your team just one thing, what would it be? Would it be clarity of purpose or infectious energy?
I would say I have a predisposition for infectious energy, always. But I think there is definitely a need for that. The other side.
I'm being cheeky. Yeah. I'm being cheeky. I get it. There's always nuances around this. But last question, forgive me. What's had the biggest impact on your own personal growth? Being the captain or being the outsider?
Being the outsider.
Okay.
Being the outsider.
Let's keep diving in on you then. Let's dive in a little bit more. You've talked about not being the most intelligent person in the room in some contexts, not being the expert and so on. But let's flip the script a bit. What is your biggest superpower? What is your one biggest superpower?
It was in your questions, actually. It was the infectious energy. Like, I think that's my biggest superpower, is I bring into the room of this infectious energy and a belief that we can do, that we can achieve. And that's why I raised the clarity of purpose point, because sometimes in the blaze of energy, in the blaze of glory, there is the need for the clarity of like, okay,
yes.
What are the milestones we need to hit on this, Ollie? And I'm just building the plane in the sky. And sometimes that's challenging for people, and often can mean that some projects don't get finished or whatever else. So I think
I get that.
So the infectious energy to start it, and I think then we need some clarity and purpose from others.
Where does that come from, that infectious energy? Without being too therapeutic about it, is it a nature nurture? Is that something you've always had throughout your life? Was that something you developed or learned? Where does it come from?
Well, I think I know. I did some therapy when I finished playing and went into PwC, because I was really struggling with the integration piece of like, how do I find value? How do I find self-worth? And I recognized through that process, actually, that a lot of my drivers were actually, probably, like, being honest, were from a childhood where I had two divorced parents from a 10-year-old, and I had spent a lot of my time trying to seek recognition, praise, love, affection, or whatever, from my dad, who just, this isn't like a criticism of him, I guess, but like, it just wasn't him. That just wasn't how he was wired. He was old school. He wouldn't give you. He'd never tell you he loved you. He'd never tell you he's proud of you, even if he was. Like, he just can't. He still can't do it to this day. So, and so there was this sort of adolescent, teenage years into my early 20s of this. Oh well, if I just score one more try, if I just become the captain, if I just play for England, if I get my first contract, blah 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 blah. Like, maybe he'll say well done, maybe he'll be proud, maybe he'll be this. And the honest truth, that never came. But it's this constant strive of, if I just do more, if I just get a bit. It wasn't obviously conscious, this sort of subconscious of like, maybe I'll prove him wrong, maybe he'll tell me this, right? And I think that drove my need initially at the beginning to be in these environments where, like, rugby was infectious. I was really good at something, and then, despite probably the most important person in my life not telling me, there was thousands, well, initially a few hundred, then thousands of people, then hundreds of thousands of people that would tell me I was brilliant. And that was infectious, right? And I fed off that community. And then I realized that, do you know what, in this environment, opportunity is vast. Like, there's so many things that can be done and that can be created by having these people that, like, are genuinely vested, genuinely believe in me being good. And so it was this sort of careful balance of, you could go one way and it become really polluting in your life and really dangerous and quite, but equally on the other side, it can be really uplifting and really supportive. And I'd say I danced that line for a while, but sometimes on the right side, sometimes on the wrong. And then going through this therapy process really helped me understand, actually, what are the things that drive me? What are the things that feed my soul? What are the things that I seek and get great value and appreciation from? And how do I make sure that I nurture them and I appreciate them for all the right reasons, and don't get too distracted by the things that can really easily distract you and become a negative drain in your life. So that's my long-winded way of answering your question, I'm afraid.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. That's right. I appreciate you sharing that. You're optimist is the title of your business, and that's, I think, your nature. How do you deal with the dark days?
You know what? I quite relish those days. I enjoy. How do I explain this? Like, I don't enjoy getting it wrong, but I enjoy getting it wrong, if that makes sense. Like, some people have said this all the time, like they learn more from their losses than they ever did from their wins. And I think that that doesn't mean I want to lose all the time, because that's just become soul destroying, right? But I think in my 20s I really struggled, right? If I worked so hard for something and I didn't get it, I couldn't console myself. I was just inconsolable. Like, so, and thankfully I won more than I lost. I think as I got a bit older and a bit more sort of understanding of stuff and a bit more sort of wiser, if that's the right word, I started to appreciate, as I say, the journey or the process or whatever of, what the outcome. Like, if, as an example, really easy one, right? I quite enjoy golf, but I'm useless at it. If I set myself a target of becoming a pro golfer, there's going to be some pretty dark days because I'm never going to get there, right?
Yes.
But what I might do is go from a 20 handicap down to a 5, right? And there is a huge level of enjoyment on that fact. Now, if my focus is entirely always on the outcome of like, well, I'm not a pro, then like my life is going to be miserable. Whereas, what I've learned to appreciate is, well, we've spoken about it already, but this journey piece and this recognition of, well, I was at 20, I'm now at 5. I mean, I'm not a 5, by the way, but just as an example of the things that I appreciate now.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it.
The row across the Atlantic, I really hope that we do get there. Obviously, I want us to be safe and whatever else. If we don't make it, as long as we're safe, I will still really value the effort, because there are loads of people that just won't even get on the boat. They won't even go to the start. Right. So obviously I'm a competitive human. I still want to succeed. I still want to achieve all the rest of it. So that doesn't really go, but I become much more appreciative and cognizant and recognize the value of daring to try.
Yeah. Daring to try. I love that. At a more philosophical level, as we draw this brilliant conversation to a close, what is the impact you're looking to have on the world around you through your work?
It's weird, mate. I spoke to my wife about this a few weeks ago. Not that we have loads of conversations like this, but we said, what's it's the classic that everyone always asks, but like, what's the one thing you'd love people to say or you'd like to think on your deathbed? You lay your head down, you take your last breath, like, we're all here for a good time. We're not here for a long time. So what is it that you'd love to say? And I think I would love to lie down and just, in a short sentence, wasn't that fun? Like, wasn't that great fun? And what that extrapolates out to is, it's this rich tapestry of shared experience with so many people that have lit up your own soul, and you've lit something in their soul, and you've left an impression on the planet that's like, we had a saying on board our Great Britain yacht when I sailed around the world of like, it's always a good time, no matter how good or how bad, it's always a good time. And I'd love to sort of sign off by saying that was a damn good time.
Oh, I love that. And gosh, that is so you. And you do it day in, day out. When you're having your best day, when you're performing at your best, everything's going in the flow, you're smashing, you are world class in what you're doing. What's the one habit or practice that helps you do that in that day?
Oh, that's such a great question. Wow. What is the one habit? Do you know what? It's probably, I think everyone has those moments. They'll know where it is. But for me, my one thing, the habit I always do, it's not like a thing, but it's an energy that I have of like, I just move from place to thing, and it's just bang, bang, bang. It just happens. Stuff just falls into place, and it's like everything, right? It's momentum. I saw it in sport. I see it in the corporate world. I see it in my day-to-day life with my kids. Like, momentum is a contagious force on both sides of the coin. When things go wrong, they go worse and worse and worse, right? Bedtime's often like that with us, with our kids. right? But when things go well, like that just something else happens, and something else happens, something else happens, something else happens, and they're the magical days, right? And I think you've got to revel in those of like, whoa, that was an epic day. But when they go wrong, it's how do you stay in the fight? Like, how do you keep consoling yourself and giving yourself that talk in your mind of like, just one more, like, come on, just one more, let's just do one more. It's just, and then you do one more, and it's like, all right, well, let's just try one more again. We just keep going. So this sort of refusal to say, do you know what? Okay, well, the mountain's even higher now, but we're just going to climb. We're just going to keep climbing.
Yeah. I really appreciate you sharing, your own journey in different shapes and form, your own reinventions, the mindset you apply to life. And yes, you're optimistic. Yes, you want to do great things. You want to have that sense of fun and, had a good crack at it, but also realistic that things don't go to plan, and you have a way of, bouncing back, moving forward. And no wonder people love working with you and for you. Where can people find out more about Optimist Performance and you, Ollie, online?
I mean, I'd love them to follow us online. LinkedIn, please reach out. Ollie Phillips. My social handles are at Ollie Phillips 11, and then Optimist is optimistperformance.com, and our social handles are all the same at Optimist Performance. So I'd love people to reach out, get in touch if they're interested in chatting more, hearing about coaching, hearing about experiential learning. It'd be brilliant to hear from them.
Yeah, this feels like a very fresh, dynamic, intentional approach to learning, to performing, to doing something really good with your life at work and at home and everything. So, yeah, I'm already thinking, how can some of my clients get more involved in that? We'll have a separate conversation about that. Ollie, what a wonderful conversation. Thank you ever so much for your time today.
Top man. Thanks, David. Really appreciate it. And lovely to see you.